Ну вот так, что теперь? Недостатки этого мира, понимаешь? Ну да что-то непонятного там, на себя так же думает, да, наоборот, потому что... Ну вот в этом странном... Ну, нет, мир-то нормальный просто, да, то есть это, да. Ну, я понял просто. Ну, да неважно это, блин, да, понимаю. Да, да, да. В нормальном мире, в неком чисто математически представляемом идеальном мире, такого уродства не было бы, понимаешь, да. Но поскольку оно есть, и ты его носитель, ну, как бы, ну, не совсем так, ты не понимаешь просто. Это не обязательно, это, ну, все, теперь копайся, что ли, в этом. А у тебя, ты не мужик, что ли? Что тебе опять просто надо, да, понимаешь, да. Ну, да, да. Ну, типа того, да. У тебя свои планы-то есть какие-то, да, то есть, ну, да, да, понимает он тебя. Ну, нет, не такой, что ну, и закопайся там. Ну, мне это не интересно, потому что, ну, вот наоборот. Ну, он о себе так говорит, потому что, да наоборот, ну о себе он так думает, да, да. Что ты от этого все равно никогда не отвяжешься, да, понимаешь. Ну, да достал уже! Ну, я понял. За себя просто. Ну, потому что, да, правда. Наоборот, значит. Ну, наверное. Ну, вот это есть он самый, да. Нет, я тебе говорю, не, я понял, что же, да. Ну да, ролл как, да. Ну да, он, я просто я говорю,
They're just like, the NPCs are like...
А, ну да. Ну вот это и есть он самый, ладно, понял. А, ну да, типа, просто баба там
well
все.
dressed, they're not...
Сама, наверное. Наоборот, значит, играет она даже. Наоборот, он себе так думает. Ну вот о себе он так думает. Ну и думай о себе как угодно тебе.
They're just kind of like, oh, Lady Luna Freya is over here. It's her. Hello, I love you. Speak to Arnea. I get to talk to her. Oh my god, I get to talk to her. I'm not ready. Okay, wait, hang on. Okay, wait, hang on. How do I look? Do I look okay? Does my hair look good? Do I need to apply my lipstick? Okay, wait, hang on. We can't fuck this up. Arnea has joined the party. I'm so happy right now. It's Biggs and Wedge! Oh, it's Biggs and Wedge! Creme brulee? What is this game? This game has dogs and cats and chocobos and creme brulee, and it has Arnea. Why is this game so amazing? I would gladly give up Gladio for Arnea.
Darkness is coming. If I were you, I'd watch my princely ass. Kingly ass.
The ultimate flavor experience! Noctis does not care.
But you need to realize just what you mean to the boys by your side.
I do.
Even if they can't solve your problems, you can't hide what's going on from them.
Ну да, то есть как вот целое детство, то есть ты правильно понимаешь, что есть объективность, да. Да, скачивай.
His head blowing up and something about an island, but that's about as much as they can tell me. So I'm gonna bust these wide open, guys. I'm gonna tell you
Ну, будь жертвой тогда.
what happens, why I like it.
Это по-мужски, это нормально, то есть, ну, то есть, понимает,
End of these two videos. You can decide whether
Работать
you would
надо,
like this
понимаю.
to happen. So buckle up, you're gonna need a seatbelt. Let's go!
Да, понимаю.
So the 2.5 novella, let's start there. Written and published in Japan by Kojima himself. And before I want to continue, I just want to say there were so many rumours that this was not canonical. There was this huge rumour that circulated for years that Kojima accidentally sent off a fan fiction, somebody else's fan fiction. He sent it through the post, the wrong package. And that they actually published someone else's fan fiction by mistake, but that they liked it and they decided to stick with it. Now, that rumour, I'm just going to say, is total bullshit. It was actually made up by P4Gramming, a site renowned for making up complete bullshit, and they did not send off a fanfic and accidentally published thousands of copies. In fact, they're still selling it on Amazon to this day. It's total nonsense, so I repeat, 2.5 is canonical, and it was written by Kojima himself. But getting into exactly what happens, now, this is really hard for me to do. Of course, I've never read it myself. There is actually no translation. There's bits and pieces, there's snippets, but this was all done in Japanese. There was never really a release here in the West, so I can't comment on exactly, but going into the core concepts, and I've researched this pretty heavily, but from what we
Ну
do
как бы
know,
как
it
лекарство, то
focuses
есть,
on a
ну да,
final
типа, ну вот это он имеет в виду, да. Продукты там производить, вот это он имел в виду. Ну типа того, да. Он на себя-то посмотри, как не знаю, как. Да наоборот, он типа себя говорит, так, да. Ну да. Хорошая игра, да. Да, понимаю, да. Да. Да, хорошая, добрая, все, типа того. Да, понимает он тебя. Ну, смотри, сам уж не да. Так что, я тебе указ, что ли, блин? Понимает он тебя просто, да? Да. Ну, типа того. Наверное, да, да. Наверное. Да. Да, наоборот. Кто с какой стороны пойдет, понимаешь? Можно с этой стороны, только ты все равно придется свое что-то куда-то выводить все это, если не понимаю. Да, за деньги спросят и просто не будет это, да, все. Конкуренция и так далее. Да, да. Ничего страшного, все нормально. Да. Ну хорошо. Видишь, много вопросов встает. Да, да, понимаю. Да, то есть это, вот это реально мужская уже, да, мужчина понимает. Да. Работать надо, все, больше ничего не думать, да. Так оно и есть счастье, и амбиции, и реализации, и все что угодно, да. Планов, действительности, да, и так далее. И узнавать тоже, да. Одиноко, да. И, кстати, связь с людьми тоже, с обществом. Потребление. Да. Жажду пива. Да. Ну да. Смотри, пока ты пьешь пиво, а потом у тебя еще будет похмелье, мы про это не думаем. Понимаешь? Пока ты пьешь пиво, кто-то будет делать, как сказать, детей кому-то там, деньги будут делать кто-то, понимаешь? Кто-то будет умнее, да, понимаешь? Кто-то будет что-то полезное делать этому миру, понимаешь? Кто-то будет делать добро людям, создавать, да, понимаешь? Пока, да. А так-то обидно. Да. Настоящий.
Of Titus's relationship. And it gets pretty gritty, guys. It is less of the pie.
Люди добрее не становятся от пива, это жирнее, наверное, ну, в смысле добрее.
It was a magical romance, and we didn't really have to see the relationship side. You know what, I'd really like to see it. And the really phenomenal thing about the 2.5 novella, and this blew my mind away, is that it actually takes place in between the events of the Besaid Island reunion and the Zanarkand perfect ending. I know, guys. In between this scene here and this scene here, this is when the novella takes place. I can barely believe that, guys, because what happens in the novella, to think they actually were squeezed in between those two scenes is crazy. So let me get into it. Yuna and Titus reunite. I know, guys. In between this scene here and this scene here, this is when the novella takes place. I can barely believe that, guys, because what happens in the novella, to think they actually were squeezed in between those two scenes is crazy. So let me get into it. Yuna and Titus reunite. They spend some time together, but one of the first things they do after reuniting and wanting to take a break, because Spira is obsessed with them, especially with Yuna. She is the high summoner who saved the world. So they decide to get away, and they decide to take a boat and go sailing around the world. It's beautiful, it's romantic, and they set a course for the boat, but supposedly they get distracted by going below deck and having the sex scenes. I know, guys, they do go there. Now, of course, we're not going to see it, but their relationship does go to third base. So while that's happening, something unnatural happens in the weather cycles. Their boat gets tossed and battered around, and they get stuck out in the middle of the ocean. Titus dives into the water after Yuna, after she gets thrown off the boat, to try to save her from drowning. And with the last ounce of his strength, as he tries to hold her head above the waves, he passes out. Then he comes back into consciousness, and the last thing he sees is, quote, a giant ject, so Braska's final aeon, ject in his Braska aeon form, holding Yuna in his giant hand. So the story continues. They wake up on an island, and Titus and Yuna, they wander around the island, trying to gather their bearings, get their heads straight, and create a plan of action. They walk about, and hostiles on the island supposedly later appear. Down the line, after a few days, Titus gets something thrown at the back of his head. He turns around angrily. It's a leathery brown round ball, and he kicks it, and it does explode. So that's the true story, guys. There was a lot of speculation that he just walked into this island, saw a ball, ran up and kicked it. No, someone throws it at the back of his head, he turns around and boots it angrily. And I do believe that Yuna and Titus were having some sort of argument at this point, or just before this. In the heated, stressful situation. I've researched this heavily, and a person who did interpret a hell of a lot of the novella said that there was no report whatsoever about Yuna waking up to Titus's decapitated head. Because that was the other thing, the other part of the rumour, that apparently he blows up and his head lands next to her. Supposedly that was never in there. There was no even mention of it. What actually happens is Titus explodes, Yuna sees it from afar, she passes out, and then when she comes to seeing the last remnants of Titus's body fading off into fireflies. So this is pretty heavy, I will admit. This is going heavy and hard at the start of this novella. But of course, remember, this takes place before the Zanarkand perfect ending. So it's not all doom and gloom from here now, so let me continue. Yuna then wanders the island alone for a couple of days, until she learns that it is actually inhabited and home to a millennium-old, unsent summoner called Johit. Johit. And we learn a hell of a lot of stuff from him. And this is where it gets super exciting. The part of this novella I really do like. Johit actually reveals that the Al-Bhed being outcasts, the whole thing was artificially engineered. It was engineered by the holy guys over at Bavel. Not only did they cast the Al-Bhed out and curse them, they actually forced them to learn a new language. They forbid them from speaking the common tongue. That's why the Al-Bhed have a different language. It was all artificially engineered. And the Al-Bhed, they were actually once called the Bedols Ibsted. He also reveals that summoners are way more powerful than 10 or 10-2, even remotely shown. Honestly, guys, the summoners have been using a fraction of their power. He reveals that what the summoners can actually do is pretty much total control over fireflies. Even more control than what the summoners were using. Not just by sending the fireflies, by doing the dance, actually pretty much control them. And Yuna, even before this point, before she even meets Johit, her summoner powers already start progressing. And that's why Johit decides to teach her, because Yuna actually admits that she's able to send souls without doing the dance anymore. She doesn't actually need to do the dance. And in fact, for the last few years, she's been doing the dance just for show. She can perform the rites standing perfectly still, but Johit then tells her, a summoner at their absolute highest level, she's not even remotely close to it yet, they can create pretty much it's not only control the pathflies, but they can create something out of nothing. They can actually control the fabric of reality. They can create things out of nothing. Yuna then asks for an example. She asks him, could she make a boat from nothing then, to sail off of this island? Johit says yes, but not to do it. And she asks why. And Johit says that it's doing something like that, creating something from nothing, is a tremendous amount of power. And it stresses the hearts of the Aeons to do such things, and therefore should be avoided.
Ну да. Ну, наверное. Я вот тоже не понимаю, как это решать. Да. Ну, да. Вот это есть на самом деле. Да. Ну да. Комментарий. Надо.
Качество, выгода, скорость. Все в Сбермаркете.
Скачайте приложение Сбермаркет и получите скидку 300 рублей по промокоду НИЮ.
The Final Fantasy series is one of the most iconic and popular JRPG franchises of all time, with just the games themselves selling 161 million units worldwide as of June 2021. This popularity also extends into the speedrunning community, with basically every game seeing runners take on many different challenges they have to offer. In many of the games, runners have come up with ways to break the way they are played almost completely. Some games are broken through corruption of the game's memory, while others can simply use game mechanics to take down bosses with ease. In Final Fantasy X, though, strategies have evolved in a very interesting way. Today, we're going to dive into some obscure findings in the Final Fantasy X community and find out about how even 20 years after the game's release, the game has been finally picked apart thanks to the tireless efforts of those looking into the game's code.
Ну да, почему да.
To understand what's going on now in the world of Final Fantasy X speedrunning, we need to take a
Ну
look
ладно,
at the
ну
90%
наоборот,
speedrun
значит, ну
itself.
да.
For this example, we'll use Care Karn VI's groundbreaking sub 10-hour run on the PS2, which he obtained earlier this year. In the Final Fantasy X speedrun, the goal of the game is pretty cut and dry. Travel through Spira and gather the Aeons to help end the spiral of death, and deal with Tidus's daddy issues in the meantime. While the run's route is pretty linear, there are a few things that cause variance in how runners take on the game's fights. Stats and equipment are paramount to the success of an FFX any % run, and without focusing on these things, the run would be much slower than it is now. For example, winning the main story Blitzball tournament in Luca is important due to the prize being a strength sphere, which helps immensely with Tidus's damage output for the rest of the game. But the Blitzball match itself can go completely wrong randomly, even with the right strategies being used. Other situations come down to whether you obtain a weapon that deals thunder elemental damage from a drop after the Obliterator fight, which allows either Tidus or Waka to deal additional damage during the Extractor fight and Moonflow later on. Tidus's weapon being dropped from that fight is about a 1 in 4 chance, and Waka's drop is about a 1 in 16 chance. These weapons can also be attained in Besaid or Kilika encounters, while the likelihood of getting these drops is extremely low. These equipment drops do save time, but they're not run killers if you don't attain them. as the current world record does not get these drops. Skipping ahead to the calm lands and after the Defender X fight, the real run killer at the top level comes from just under 8 hours into the run, and it's all because of this equipment. Encounters become pretty irrelevant after a certain point in the game, and the only reason many of them are taken in the run is to
Ну,
farm
чё они
items to
при-
make
да,
bosses
да.
easier.
Ну вот это и есть
Things-
сам. Ну, я, ну еще, ладно, рассказывай. Что тебе, да. Ну наоборот, ну нет, ну вот наоборот, ну вот надо. Ну и что дальше, да, понимаю. Да. Ну наоборот. Да, ты начнешь делать, просто запряжешься туда, и там тоже профессия, кажется. Это же мужская тема, да. Нет? Ну нет, конечно. Ну не мужская там все, да, понятно. Ну делать бесплатно. Детей же да, их еще, да, они, дети имбецилы, ты не знаешь, что дети имбецилы? Их надо кормить, они постоянно, мама, дай, орут. Да, их надо, чтобы мама рядом была, иначе они болеть начинают, они орать начинают, и с ними что-то не то начинает происходить. Да, потому что мама не, чтобы она мамой была неподвижной, как бы так скажем, чтобы она, типа того. Ну, да, это они развлекают, как одну, да, так, да, да. Ну да. Ну, наверное, как-то, да. Вот не жестоко, как вот не жестоко, не знаю, там. Не жестокие все, да. Да, вот это момент, да. Да, пожить в этой реальности. Да, пожалуйста, да, поживи. А детей кто будет рожать, да, понимаешь? Да. И потом эта реальность кто-то ее сделал за деньги, понимаешь? За деньги. Специалисты, они, да, то есть, ну, да. То есть, мужиком нормально себя чувствуешь, ну, как один из вариантов, да. Понимаешь? Ну, тогда стань программистом, тогда сам делай. Ну да, чё ты. Да, и живи, да, либо того, да. Ну да, и так далее, понимаешь? А тут тоже уже другой, да, понимаешь. То есть ты будешь делать, что попало, чтобы это самое, да. Ну да. Ну понял так. Бывает так, понял точно. Да. Я тоже так думаю. Делать надо свое дело просто. Хорошо, да. По-настоящему как-то нормально. Да. Ну тут я не указал, не знаю. Кажется, всё. Да. Вот это он имеет в виду. Ну да. Ну смотри сам. Как я пошел в монтажный техникум? Как я стал строителем? Да, был Рамилян туда списался. Да. Ну, наверное, нет, он так все это не знает. Да. Уходи на ночь, вообще просто. Там, где простого есть. Мечтаешь. Ты же мужик, блин, соображай сам, найдешь тогда мечтание, так скажем, да, да. Не согласны, да? То есть, ну не надо. Ну, да, где придется, понимаешь. Да. Делай добро людям ты, да. Да, наоборот, понимаешь. Да. Ну, наверное, да. Ну, знаешь, да. Так. Так, стоп. Как правильно будет? Вот это, думаю, вот он есть. Наверное, да. Начинаем.